What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, April 5th, 2018. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Quick little program note. Tomorrow in our third hour, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us. And I know a lot of you missed her when she had to step out for her choir duties last week, but she will be back tomorrow, and I know you're looking forward to that. All right, let's start with some of the domestic politics. All of a sudden, Robert Mueller is back to requesting that Donald Trump be interviewed as part of his investigation into collusion with Russia, which is odd because only a day or so ago, Mueller was saying to Trump's lawyers that Trump is no longer a target of the investigation. And of course, a lot of people, such as Trey Gowdy, said, no, that Mueller shouldn't have said that. It's inappropriate behavior for a prosecutor, and Trump needs to be careful, because Mueller has gathered all of this information, and in a face-to-face meeting with Trump, Mueller's going to have the upper hand. Now, Cheryl Atkinson is saying, well, if Mueller is going to interrogate Donald Trump, it should be under the same exact rules that Hillary Clinton had when she was being interviewed over her email server scandal. In other words, an exoneration letter should be drafted in advance. Immunity should be given to top Trump aides, and they're allowed to sit in on the interview. The interview will not be recorded. The lead official, in this case Mueller, won't attend. And the number two official's family has received large donations from Trump political friends. Prior to the interview, the lead official meets privately on an airport runway with Donald Trump's wife. And the main interviewer has expressed disdain for Trump's opponents, such as discussing an insurance plan with higher-ups to undermine them, if the same terms aren't offered. Was Clinton's interview process unfair, or is the one proposed for Trump unfair? And as long as they believe Trump didn't intend any harm, he's off the hook for any crimes they may think he has committed. And we're just trying to underscore this obvious double standard and hypocrisy in institutional Washington, D.C. There is so much evidence of crime and corruption surrounding the Clintons, surrounding the Clinton Foundation, surrounding that email server, and everybody's just looking the other way and whistling. And meanwhile, they're pouring all of these resources and time and energy into trying to find something, anything on Donald Trump, that if they can't prosecute him, they can at least use it as a reason to try and impeach him if the Democrats seize control of Congress in November. Now, there's been an interesting little development in the Russiagate story, and it may indicate that the whole story is about to blow up. Now, over the last few months, Professor Joseph Mifsud has become the so-called expert on Russian intelligence. And he is characterized as a Russian intelligence asset in the corporate media, despite his declarations to the contrary. However, evidence has surfaced that says Mifsud is not a Russian spy and actually worked for British intelligence. Now, who else worked for British intelligence? Christopher Steele, the author of that dodgy dossier. And if, in fact, it turns out Mifsud is connected to British intelligence instead of Russian intelligence, this turns the entire Russiagate debacle on its head. Because Mifsud was the source that claimed Russia had dirt on Clinton in the thousands of emails with Papadopoulos. So Mifsud may be a phony. He may be there just to plant all this information. Now, why British intelligence would want to get rid of Donald Trump, I don't know. But it's looking less and less like Russia had anything at all to do with any of this. And of course, the dossier is completely discredited. Now, getting on back to Hillary Clinton and her email server. And I want to preface this by reminding everybody, I have a question about that email server, and it goes all the way back to Bill Clinton's campaign for his second term in office and a scandal called Chinagate. And that scandal was that Bill Clinton, using his authority as president, authorized the sale to China of highly sensitive technology over the objections of the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, the intelligence agencies, because this technology had military application. And at the same time Bill Clinton did this, huge amounts of Chinese money poured into his re-election campaign through Chinese American citizens like Charlie Tree to make it quasi-legal. But as the investigation into Chinagate started to dig a little deeper, it did prove that the money was coming from Chinese businessmen and even Chinese intelligence. But the investigation was stalled when the White House email server suffered a crash, and oh golly gee whiz, we had not been doing the backups. It's just one of those things. Now, as you know, a lot of people were very concerned because when the email server issue went public, Hillary Clinton supposedly wiped the server. Remember that little joke of hers? What, you mean with a cloth or something? And then it turned out that the server had not just had files erased, the disks had been wiped with specific software to erase unused areas. BleachBit, I think, is what they were using. And so the general attitude was, well, we'll never know what was in all those deleted emails. We'll just have to take Hillary Clinton's word that it was all personal stuff not related to work. Well, as it turns out, Datto Incorporated provided the FBI with the physical storage node containing all of the emails from Hillary Clinton's private server. Datto was the backup system. And apparently, Director Comey, earlier, well, actually in January of last year, was sent a letter from the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform asking for all documents and communications referring or relating to the FBI's collection and access of the Datto Incorporated storage node and all records preserved on the Datto Incorporated storage node. This went to Director James Comey, and he never responded. So this is an interesting story. There was a lawsuit between Datto and their cloud server concerning what the cloud server was backing up. The cloud server claims Datto gave them permission to back up everything. Datto says they did not. Why would that be an issue? Probably because management at Datto is trying to avoid being arcanicided. But it clearly indicates the cloud had backups of everything, including all of the missing emails. Former FBI Director Comey had them the whole time. Okay, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. A lot of people are still scratching their head over why Donald Trump brought, confirmed war hawk John Bolton in as National Security Advisor, and there's a potential explanation that is coming out from Russia Insider. It turns out that John Bolton is Sheldon Adelson's poodle, his pet hatchet man. And Donald Trump needs Adelson's cash for the November campaign. So that was the deal. Adelson apparently called up Donald Trump and said, I'll give you all this money for November, but only if you bring John Bolton back in and put him into the National Security Advisor position. And I'm sure when they're talking about how the advisors forced Donald Trump to change course on pulling out of Syria, that John Bolton was probably the loudest voice among them. So we have too many people with too much money that have too much influence over what is supposed to be a republic with democratically elected leadership. All right, let's take some phone calls here. Lisa in Pennsylvania, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Boy, I got on. Hello?
You're on the air.
Okay. I got on quickly. I'm calling. I won't take up hardly any of your time, but I just think it's so important to reiterate what the veteran intelligence professionals for sanity found when they did their investigation into this lie about Russia hacking into the DNC or what have you. Ray McGovern especially said, he's been waiting and aging while, waiting to be called to testify in front of Congress about it. It's just, I think, something that needs to be pointed out as much as possible. I write a weekly column and I do my best, but you have such a big audience that I just think it's real important to talk about that as much as possible, if you can.
Well, I absolutely agree here. And it's very obvious that all of official Washington, D.C., even Hillary's worst enemies, don't want this Russia hacking story exposed. They don't want the email server exposed. It's looking more and more to me like Hillary Clinton was running an espionage operation out of the U.S. Department of State while serving as Secretary of State. And were that to come out publicly, that sort of scandal could bring the entire government down. And I think that's why there's this huge stonewall around all of these issues. Hillary literally has a doomsday device with which she can blackmail the entire government.
I think you're correct, and she's definitely has been, as you've pointed out, and others have, in cahoots with the Bush crime family for years.
Yes.
And people are running scared. But and I was never a Trump supporter per se, but I find myself defending the man over this Russia lie because it's the right thing to do.
I agree. I'm the same way. You know, I'm very disappointed in Donald Trump. He's broken a lot of promises to us, but I'm going, like you, I'm going to defend him against all these lies and slanders and political machinations directed against him, because it's not the way the United States is supposed to work.
Exactly. So that's all I have, and I appreciate your taking my call.
All right, well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go and switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, but the problem with Donald Trump is he could end this today. He can stop this all today. Mike, he should cut Britain off, Saudi Arabia and Israel. He can stop this today. Get rid of everybody in the CIA, start fresh with Ray McGovern in charge of that, William Binney, the charge of the NSA, and the DIA, bring back Michael Flynn. You know, he can stop this. He's not. You know, call me, Trump. You know, like, I'll clean out house. You know, like, it's, you know, if they threaten you, they threaten you, Mike. People die every day, but, you know, you got to, like, protect, you got to believe in something. You know, I mean, I don't understand why. I'm watching the UN today, Mike.
Yes.
Going on live right now.
Yes.
With the British woman bringing up Georgia, Russia's responsibility. Georgia was Saakashvili, who invaded South Ossetia, right?
Yes.
Killed Russian citizens. They use that. They use Crimea again. You know,
well, because they don't have anything for the Skripal case, which is what this UN Security Council meeting is supposed to be about. Moscow asked for this meeting following the U.S. veto of a UNSC measure to investigate. Moscow said, let's have a meeting and just talk this out. And Britain doesn't have anything. So they're trying to do guilt by association or guilt by past history. And yeah, they're going to say, well, we should all condemn Russia for the Skripal poisoning because they did all this other bad stuff, which is a dead giveaway that Britain doesn't have any evidence that Russia had anything to do with the Skripal poisoning.
But then they're bringing up Syria again with Assad, with the gassing, which, you know, nobody believes this. Mike, I listened to Nigel Farage, I listen to George Galloway, 98.10% calling in. Don't believe it. You're sure you're going to get the stupid people calling in, which is very small percentage. But you know,
don't forget the paid shills.
Yeah, all right. Paid shills, and you know, add a couple. You know, but I mean, Mike, you know, this is ridiculous though. Like, how much more of this can go on? You know, like. It's, like I said before, it scares the crap out of me because somebody can make a mistake. And you know what, Mike? When this fails, they're going to use something else that's greater than the one before it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they're already trying to resurrect Malaysian Airlines Flight 17. That started yesterday where the Dutch...
That up, Mike.
Huh?
She brought that up. She brought MH17 up at the UN Live just a couple minutes ago.
Yes.
So, yeah. It's a joke, Mike. Like, they're not going to let this up. Like, this is empire, Mike.
Yes.
You know, and, I mean, I don't know what else to say, Mike. It's scaring the crap out of me because, you know, these people are amateurs. Boris Johnson's a fool. Theresa May looks like a fool. The UK people I feel sorry for, you know, because, but, you know, majority of them seem like they know what's going on now, which is good, but the governments don't listen to us. That's the problem, Mike. We're not being listened to. And, Mike, by the way, remember the Skripal guy was linked to Orbis Investigations, right? Which is linked to MI5, which is linked to Christopher Steele.
Yes. Well, Skripal's association with Steele is even closer than that. It's only 1 degree of separation.
which then you look at who would benefit from poisoning him. You know, not killing him, but using it as a weapon against Russia in terms of, like, you know, making them look like the bad guy. You know what I mean? It'd be the CIA or MI5, right, at this point, because they're basically two peas in a pod at this point. I mean, there's no other actors in the world that would do this besides MI5 and the CIA. Elements, not the whole CIA and MI5, because there's good people there, Mike. You know, just like in our government, there's good people. Not everybody's bad, but there's a small element that are crooked. You know, that's all I want to say, Mike. You know, just aggravating me how we can put up with this crap so much longer. You know, I mean, if we make it out of this year, Mike, I'll be surprised at this point.
Yeah, I feel much the same way. Anyway, Dustin, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and we were going to get into Skripal a little bit later in the show. But I was watching that UN Security Council live broadcast right up until the moment we started the radio show. And what was really instructive was to look at the faces of the people behind the speaker. And look at their expressions, and it's a dead giveaway. They're not buying this nonsense about Russia being behind the Skripal case either. And after Portendown came on out and said, we can't identify the Novichok as having come from Russia, Theresa May came out with that comment about how, well, whoever did it and wherever the Novichok came from, we're sure that Vladimir Putin was behind it. And they've come up with another lie to say that forget about Portendown, we have another resource that's identified the very exact laboratory in Russia where the Novichok came from. So Great Britain, like the U.S. government, follows that old saying, if at first you don't succeed, lie, lie again. So anyway, now people are still talking about the latest texts that are showing how the FBI and the Department of Justice colluded, yes, there's the collusion right there, to push the FISA warrants through in order to spy on the Trump team. And again, this is something that should be investigated. Attorney General Jeff Sessions has refused a special counsel. He says he's got a prosecutor working on it, but that prosecutor basically works underneath Jeff Sessions, whereas a special counsel is supposed to be independent, cannot be touched. That's the reason for a special counsel, is to isolate them from political influence. Well, this prosecutor from Utah doesn't have that. He's still subject to all kinds of pressure coming from his higher-ups. Now, another memo has surfaced in which the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein gave Robert Mueller secret permission to expand the probe. Remember when everybody was asking, why is Mueller looking at all these other things when his supposed task is Trump-Russia collusion? And apparently Mueller went to Rosenstein and said, I can't find anything. And Rosenstein said, well, start looking everywhere. Just find something, anything. I don't care anymore. So it's a very obvious corrupt investigation here. New development on the YouTube shooter. They're making a big deal over the fact that she had Paul Joseph Watson videos on her website. So good for Paul Joseph Watson. But I'm wondering if this is the beginning of a campaign by YouTube to say, see, we're justified in shutting down the independent media because they're inspiring this kind of violence. Now, if you're a follower of Paul Joseph Watson, you will know that no, he does not support or encourage violence at all. But at this point, the corporate media, including the corporate social media, are desperate for any way to shut the independent voices down, because we won't do what we're told. We won't read those Sinclair Broadcasting must-read scripts. We will not take our news from military intelligence people. We go on out, we grab the facts that are available, we do our own analysis, and that analysis is what we present to you. And then we rely on you, our intelligent listeners and readers, to decide for yourself what is going on. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, speaking of Sinclair Broadcasting, somebody just leaked a memo, an internal memo, warning staff at Sinclair not to give statements to the media or express negative information about the company, because that can have huge implications. Translation, you'll get fired. This is a real mess. It's basically shown to the American people that all of the news you get in corporate media is in fact controlled and scripted. There is no diversity of opinion that is being allowed anymore. They're pushing the liberal, New World Order, globalist agenda, gun confiscation. The economy's fine. Trust us. And all those people we're invading, well, they're bad people. They had it coming. Another article coming out of Global Research up in Canada saying that, yes, the U.S. and its media lie Americans into invasions routinely. And they cite the most obvious and best-known example, which is the 2003 invasion of Iraq on the basis of, lies about weapons of mass destruction. And of course, the invasion prior to that was based on the lie about how the Iraqis were stealing incubators from Kuwaiti hospitals and leaving the babies to die on the floor. It's all a lie. Assad's sarin gas. No world leader gets up and says, look, I feel like invading this country over there because we can make a lot of money, and so I need you to send your children over there to be killed and crippled, invading them. And by the way, you're also going to pay for the costs of the war, and me and my buddies will keep all the profits. You wouldn't get anybody to go to a war. You would, and that's why all wars have to be initiated with some kind of a fraud or a lie. Oh, trust us, the Lusitania wasn't smuggling weapons to Great Britain. Trust us, there really were torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. Trust us, there was a Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. And, of course, history books will look back and acknowledge these lies. But by the time history acknowledges the lies, they lack immediacy, and so the lesson tends to be lost on ordinary people, where they say, yeah, we were lied to in the past. No reason to think we're being lied to right now. Of course there is. Rulers lie to their people all the time. In fact, if you go up to that little gray menu box at the top of my main page, there's an article of the liars, by the liars, and for the liars, which lists some of the biggest whoppers in history foisted on populations by their rulers. Now, another article that's coming out of Global Research is questioning whether Americans should trust the intelligence agencies anymore. And of course you can't. Of course you can't. And they point out something that we all need to take to heart, especially in this age of media mendacity. Government by deceit cannot be a democracy, because democracy requires a fully informed population making good choices. That's what Thomas Jefferson said. It's the highest duty of the American citizen to keep themselves fully informed so that they can make good choices. But if people are walking into those voting booths or those recruitment offices based on a hallucination, a fantasy, that's not democracy anymore. It's just another tin pot dictatorship. Now, over at the New York Slimes, about a year ago, they hired, for the opinion page, 2 Israeli advocates, Brett Stephens and Barry Weiss. And one is a columnist, and the other is an opinion editor-writer. And the two are basically out there attacking anybody who criticizes Israel and smearing them as anti-Semites. And this is Israel's big tactic, to try and blur the line between real anti-Semitism and a justifiable, reasonable criticism of the actions of the government of Israel. And they've been doing it a long time. Remember when Amy Goodman over at Democracy Now!, she had that former member of the Knesset on her show. And the Knesset member said, yeah, of course it's a trick. We scream anti-Semite to shut people up. But it's not really working all that well, is it? Because they've overused it. They've burned it out. It's lost its shock value, and we understand that it is just a trick to get us to stay quiet. But we can't stay quiet any longer. We're on the edge of a global war that could go nuclear, and Israel is right in the middle of it, cheering it on all sides. Meanwhile, again at the New York Slimes, they came out with this article asking, is Putin a CIA agent? And when you consider, this is the same newspaper that came out with headlines like Mother Russia crashes the Oscars, what homoerotic videos can teach us about modern Russia, and now the latest one is Putin a CIA agent. And basically this was written by Thomas Friedman, who's supposed to be this well-respected, highly honored journalist but he's proving himself to be another prostitute and a correspondent because he asked the question and then launches 14 paragraphs of completely unfounded allegations, personal grievances, and impotent rage. Facts would only get in the way, of course, which is why Thomas isn't interested in those. But it's like this meeting up at the United Nations Security Council. Britain's out there, Russia stole Crimea. All the same lies being recycled over and over and over again, and we all know they're lies. And if you see a replay of this, watch the faces of the other people in the room. They don't believe it either. We've got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Getting on back. We have a caller on the line. Mike in Kentucky. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, this 5G spectrum grab and the potential that this is yet another monster tech bubble that they're blowing up. And so I would caution anybody with their investments to be ready to get out when confidence goes south on this stuff. But at the same time, I found that there's some stuff that's been patented. I don't know if you looked into it about the inducing sympathetic brain waves, and I guess there's some mystery as to how the Russians were able to do it, and our intelligence community basically said, well, we couldn't figure out how to do it without cooking people's brains. But there's this I guess a town in Russia that mysteriously all fell asleep about the time that Russia was experimenting with this sort of stuff.
Well, I know the Japanese are using magnetic fields rather than radio waves to basically try and alter brain patterns. And as a matter of fact, on Outrageous Acts of Science not too long ago, there was this demonstration of this gentleman who was wearing this little hat with some electromagnets in it, and he was just walking along. And every time somebody pushed a button on a remote control, he would all of a sudden lose his balance and stagger off to one side. So a lot of people are kind of working on this technology. I'm unaware of any kind of a patent where the 5G radiation is supposed to do this. For one thing, its frequency is way, way too high.
Well, apparently they're not. The previous FCC director says he's going to let the market define 5G, and part of the sort of Part 15 type code for unlicensed devices has been replaced, or they're going to be allowing white space devices across the television spectrum wherever there's not a already licensed broadcast. And of course, they're supposed to be registered up to 4 watts. And they'll be able, obviously major corporations. And the reason I called in is it looks like the Chicago Mafia, whoever that is, a cabal between the Kolnirja Mafia and the Russians. They're taking over. Tribune Media is taking over Sinclair. Sinclair was involved in a fight back when they only had a few $1 billion worth of holdings. I think there was a few dozen stations. Now they're close to 280 stations.
Yes.
In the last 20 years. Back 20 years ago, they wanted the digital TV format that is being rolled out now that is much better for mobile and reflected signals, CODFM based, that is going to a MPEG-4 modulation. Without getting too technical, this would allow people with phones and tablets to have a tuner or, some device that they could add, or an app they could download and add tuners. If a lot of smartphones have FM radio tuners built in. If you buy them in foreign markets, they're activated. Here you have to hack
it's inside the GPS chip. It's inside the GPS chip. And the reason they're not activated in the U.S. Is they want you to go over the internet, running up your minutes, and then going to the website of the broadcaster so you can see more advertising.
Exactly. So the fix was put in 20 years ago so that they couldn't do this with television. And what this does is part of this dominating the human domain mentality from the military. They want to track all inputs and outputs going in and out of all the human resources.
Yes.
So broadcast television is a one-way thing. If you don't have a smart TV, you're sitting at home without a phone in the room. You can sit here and listen to RBN off the FTA satellite feed, and they ain't got a clue what you're listening to out in your work shed or whatever. And the same thing if you've got a broadcast signal, for television. These free-to-air satellites are, you can listen to Russia TV right now, and they don't have a clue you're listening listening to Russian TV or watching it because it's not over the internet. Now, this silent sound subliminal mind control, which is patent number 5159703, issued in 1992, induces a tinnitus-like sound in your head, but underneath of that is audio, just like these
they can modulate
machines.
it. I read about that a while ago, and the idea is that messages can be beamed into your ear, and you're going to hear it without any physical device nearby, which is kind of like out of Minority Report, where you're going to be walking down a shopping mall, and there'll be targeted advertising aimed at you that only you are hearing, and it's a little bit scary. Okay, because
and the 5G rolling out.
Okay, let me have the floor here for a second.
Okay, sorry.
My concern is you can't point to any one of these radio energy emitters and say this is a problem. But my concern is our world is saturated in radio energy. 3G, 4G, 5G, police radio, AM, FM, over-the-air TV broadcasting, radars, police radios, and so forth. It's just ubiquitous. And the sum total of that radio energy, that is a lot of energy out there. Now, the so-called experts are saying it's still not enough to break a molecular bond. You have to be up at microwave oven levels of energy to do that. But over at Johns Hopkins, they discovered an interesting phenomenon called molecular resonance, where even a low-energy radio wave can start a molecule shaking, and if it's at the right frequency, the shaking will increase until the molecule starts to break. And that resonance principle we've seen in the real world, like the Tacoma Narrows, Galloping Gertie Bridge. So there's a concern there. But as long as these technologies are making money, don't expect the government to take a critical look at them.
The example that I would give is a flour sifter. A lot of people have sifted flours to make cakes or biscuits. And the blood-brain barrier can be affected like this. You put your, electric razor or your phone on vibrate and set it on that flour shifter and watch the flour just go right through the sifter without turning a crank. This is what we're talking about here. And I think there's sections of
I don't think that's a good analogy. I don't think that's a good analogy because the blood-brain barrier isn't a sieve. It's a chemical barrier. And certain chemicals are allowed to pass through. It's a dynamic system. Certain chemicals are allowed to pass.
Extreme exercise, though, and exposure to these waves has been shown also to break down the blood-brain barrier. That was I just read something. It might have been on your website about the blood-brain barrier.
No, that was not on my website. Anyway, Mike, thank you for the call and the information, and thank you for taking us totally off topic. We're going to let you go here and take another phone call from Steve in West Virginia. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I'm a first-time caller, and I've been listening to your show for a long time and love you. Just got a quick question. Well, first of all, there's a lot of people that are out there right now that are unhappy with this YouTube situation of being demonetized and stuff. And I think at one time a lot of them had regular jobs and they're upset with the system and they're creating content, patriot content. Well, YouTube is demonetizing them, and why can't they all put their head together and create another YouTube?
Other YouTubes are being created.
YouTube was created by
there are all kinds of alternatives. There's DTube. There's DTube. There's a whole bunch of others, and new ones are starting. We just have to pick which one we think is likely to be the best, and move all of our videos over to that.
Yeah, I agree with you, but if you go onto some of these sites, and I won't mention them, these people are still really upset, and they're still whining about it every single day.
Well, they have a reason to be upset. Now, in my case, YouTube never allowed me to monetize any of my videos, not even Claire's music videos. So it really didn't impact me all that much. I'm not doing what I do to make money. I could probably make a lot more money doing other things. I'm doing this because I'm trying to head off a world war. And so if YouTube doesn't want to allow me to monetize my videos, I don't care. That's not what they're there for. But I can understand people who become dependent on that revenue stream being very upset about it, especially because a lot of these videos really are quite harmless. They're obviously being targeted on the basis of political bias. Now, at some point, somebody might consider a class action lawsuit, but again, YouTube will defend itself saying, we're a private company, we're not a public forum, and therefore we exercise our right to decide who to do business with and who not. This coming from the same people that made that big stink over that baker refusing to make a wedding cake for a lesbian couple.
Exactly. And you just nailed it right there. You're doing this not for the monetary gain. You're doing it to help, to help the Patriot movement out. But these other people are not. There's a lot of them are really super dependent on this income from YouTube, and they've got to find an alternative source. So that's all I got to say, but thank you very, very much, and continue to do a great job.
I will do my best. Thank you very much for the phone call. Thank you for the kind words, and we're going to let you go. Getting on back to the news. Now, as you know, Donald Trump has done this amazing flip-flop regarding Syria. First, he said, we're going to get out very soon. We're going to let other people take care of Syria. Then, apparently, under extreme pressure from his advisors, and apparently forgetting he is the boss, Trump said, yeah, we're going to stay in there for a while longer. And today, basically saying they want more of the regional allies to put more skin into the game. In other words, President Trump, who's in charge of a military which is in Syria illegally, is now asking other countries in the area to also come into Syria illegally. That's how absurd this whole process has become. And they're back to saying, oh, this is all about making sure that ISIS can never come back. There's an easy way to make sure ISIS never comes back. Stop signing the paychecks. I mean, once again, as the Syrian army routes the U.S. proxies out of Ghouta, they keep finding all this documentation confirming that the U.S. is covertly supporting the same people they're telling you are the enemy, justifying the continued U.S. presence in Syria. Now, what's going on here is that the U.S. basically lost in Syria. Russia won that one. And the U.S. is throwing a tantrum, is what it amounts to here. All right, let's take another phone call. Kevin in West Virginia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. I got a couple of things on my mind. The first one is David Hogg. I know you and I kind of agree that this guy's probably a crisis actor or something's really up with him.
Yes.
But there's something that's been really bothering me about him. I think they're going to use him as a sacrificial lamb. And I don't want to see any harm done. I like the guy, I'll put it to you that way. But I don't want to see any harm done to him for the fact that he'd be a martyr. But I just got this really odd feeling that they're probably going to use him in a false flag. I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Well, they might make him a bloody shirt. It's certainly not beyond the realm of possibility. Apparently, there was supposed to be a shooting involving the March for Our Lives, but the police found the couple with a room full of weapons. That's been hushed up. But at this point, the gun grabbers are desperate. There is nothing they will not resort to push forward their agenda of repealing the Second Amendment and totally disarming the American people.
Totally agree with that. The second thing I wanted to point out at you was there's these First Amendment and Second Amendment auditors coming to Texas and I think the video was last week or the week before, where there was a few of the Second Amendment auditors were carrying a pistol, and the police department pulled out an AR. Practically held them at gunpoint because they were
Kevin,
yeah.
Can you speak a little closer to the microphone because you're breaking up and it's hard to understand you?
Okay. Is that better?
A little bit. We've got a bad connection.
Okay. There's these Second Amendment auditors are coming to Texas because of what happened. There was a video last week of a police department in Texas. A guy was carrying his, holstered, had his pistol holstered, and then the police department, had pulled an AR-15 on him. And now these 500 First Amendment and Second Amendment auditors coming to Texas. But I was concerned because the National Guard was going to be down there as well, could there be something actually going on as well as protecting the border with the National Guard and these immigrants through Honduras? Could there be an attempt?
Kevin, I'm sorry. I literally cannot understand you on this phone connection here. And I think what you were saying is you were expressing concern that the National Guard is heading toward the southern border of the United States of America, and you're wondering if something else might be going on. Now, first of all, I'm not sure what you mean by First and Second Amendment auditors. I don't know where they're coming from or what their job is. But again, we have seen all across the country, including in Texas, where the police are exceeding their lawful authority and they are starting to harass law-abiding gun owners. And that is a very alarming sign because we know from past history that every rising tyranny, every rising dictatorship disarms its people. We were mentioning that just yesterday, how Adolf Hitler and the Nazis selectively disarmed the Jews prior to rounding them all up and sending them to the slave labor camps.
That, if you can hear me, that's what exactly I was getting at.
Okay.
First and Second Amendment auditors, I don't think you can hear me.
I can hear you. I'm hearing you now. I just, can you explain what a First and Second Amendment auditor is and who they work for and what their job is?
A First Amendment and Second Amendment auditor are guys that go and try to record the government or people in power suppressing people's First and Second Amendment rights. They try to make it public on the tyranny. A First Amendment and Second Amendment auditor is trying to exercise their right and expose the government that's or people like the police that are being tyrannical.
Okay. So this is a private group, a private organization that is pointing out where Americans' constitutional rights are being violated. That makes a lot of sense, and that's a very important thing that we should all be doing.
Yes, it is, and there's a police department in Texas from I think it was a week ago, put a video out where a guy had his pistol holstered, and the police department in Texas pretty much held this guy at gunpoint with an AR-15 just because he was walking down the street with this pistol holstered, open carry. But it was holstered. It wasn't concealed or anything. And there's 500 First Amendment and Second Amendment auditors coming down to Texas. And I find it coincidental that there's going to be people, down in the National Guard down in Texas, the same time as 500 First Amendment and Second Amendment auditors are trying to expose this police department. Maybe
I see where you're going. Anyway, listen, Kevin, we got to let you go. We got to do a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take another phone call. Keith in Montana. Aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I just want to clear up something there. On my show on Sunday, I did an interview with David, who runs this News Now Houston, also has a YouTube channel to that. Anyway, as this auditor is mentioned, or the other caller mentioned about this auditor, these are guys that sit around in these bright fluorescent green outfits with all their photography equipment, and they sit on public property and they film whatever they want, which is noted by the Homeland Security that photography is not a crime. Anyway, in doing so, they go to these different branches of the FBI or whatever federal building it is, even Air Force bases and whatever, and they just record from a public location. And then, of course, all hell breaks loose because everyone believes that you do not have the right for public photography. And that's what the term of the audit means.
Okay.
And I think what this other gentleman was saying there was that he was wondering whether or not, with the National Guard being down there, if this is going to provoke some type of reaction in that sense, because if there's going to be a large gathering, there's another firm called Open Carry Texas, which is down there, and that's what this other gentleman was calling about, was the arrest of these individuals, slamming them down to the sidewalk, tasing them and stuff. Anyway, that's the deal behind this, but it's a nationwide movement. They do it all over the nation. And there's a lot of arrests, and of course there's a lot of trials and stuff. But usually most people wind up having everything thrown out. But there's a few law enforcement agencies that just will not let go because they believe that everyone that is building any type of a federal building paid through tax dollars is a criminal.
Well, yeah, but again, anybody has a right to take a picture in public, and that's been reaffirmed over and over. So what this amounts to is a campaign of harassment. I remember many years ago when I was working on Lost, where I needed to shoot some background plates from the top of the Dole Cannery, which at that time, that's where the production offices were located. And so I'm up on the roof with a nice camera and a tripod, just taking a panorama of images to stitch together into a plate for the optical effects. And I got stopped by building security, and they called Homeland Security, and I had to get them to call the production office and say, yes, I was just up there, making a TV show. But again, I wasn't shooting any classified building. I wasn't even shooting government buildings. I was shooting the hills that are above Honolulu. So, yeah, it's a situation where the law says one thing and the real world experience out on the streets or on the top of a parking structure is often quite different.
Right. Yeah. The other thing is, like, if you were a terrorist, of course, we know the FBI is behind all domestic terrorism, but if you were a terrorist, you wouldn't be sitting there with bright green sitting out there on a public corner to be able to do this. But anyway, your break's coming up here, but I just thought we got to clarify that there, but that's archived in my last Sunday show there. So that's about an hour and 15 minutes talking to David down there. Okay.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot. And I'm surprised I had not heard of them prior to this moment. But we all need to be auditors. We all see things happening in front of us, and we have a right to take out our cell phones and take a video of it and put it on the web and make it go viral. And the law is on our side, and we can't knuckle under to the bullying by people who want to be able to just go on out and violate the law, and violate the Constitution with impunity. We cannot tolerate that any longer. We absolutely have to. Shaming, I think, qualifies as free speech under the First Amendment. We're going to take a break now for station identification. We'll be back with hour number 2 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And getting on back to the war zones and the situation in Syria, there's a very interesting article that came out of Information Clearinghouse talking about the largely unrecognized U.S. occupation of Syria. And that's exactly what it is. The United States has invaded Syria with a significant military force. It's occupying nearly 1/3 of the territory. It's announced plans for an indefinite occupation and is plundering the country's petroleum resources. Now, Washington has no authorization under international or even U.S. law to invade and occupy Syria, much less attack Syrian forces, which it has done repeatedly. It does not have a resolution from the UN Security Council. It does not have a legal warrant to create new administrative and governance structures in the country to replace the current Syrian government. Again, this is illegal from beginning to end. The U.S. has invaded Syria. And they sell it to you, the American people, by saying, oh, Assad is terrible. He's an evil person. We must save those Syrians from an evil, tyrannical government. And that didn't work. And then, oh, Assad is gassing his own people. And then when that lie didn't work, well, we're not in Syria to attack Syria. We're there to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda as part of the global war on terror. And then they were back to Assad as gassing his people, and now they're back to ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They changed their justification for the war so much, I think people have picked up on the fact that we're not being told the real reasons for the war in Syria, which of course is the petroleum resources, a pipeline right-of-way, and to get Syria under a U.S. puppet ruler as a stepping stone to the coming invasion of Iran. Now, over in Veterans Today, they're saying that based on a purely military review, Russia won the Syria war. And, of course, Russia is in Syria at the request of and with the permission of the Syrian government. And ISIS and Al-Qaeda are all but gone. And the U.S. justification for remaining in Syria is, well, they might come back. Well, if they come back, I'm sure that Russia and Syria will be able to handle it. So they're not giving up. they're not giving up. And one of the reasons they're not giving up in Syria, or for that matter Afghanistan, is they've built a momentum for the conquest of much of the world. And unfortunately, when you're using the momentum of the past wars to propel the future wars, the first one you lose is your last one. Support will collapse. A lot of people, even if though they think the wars are wrong, they're saying, well, we're doing okay. We're winning them all. I guess it's kind of okay. But the first time we demonstrably lose one of these wars, the first time we get kicked out of one of these countries, everybody's going to say, okay, America's military is not supreme. They can fail. They can lose. And that's a very scary thing to be thinking about when you're looking at potential war with Russia and China. Now, Putin and representatives from Iran and Turkey are in Ankara to basically hammer out a peace plan for Syria. And this is, of course, a direct challenge to Trump and the West, because if everybody comes to an agreement and the fighting stops, then the U.S. doesn't have an excuse to be there anymore. And the American people would be justified in standing up and saying, bring our kids home. Stop all of this. Stop spending all this money. We are in dire need of that money here to pay teachers, to repair our roads, to repair our bridges, to get our country back to being what it used to be. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Roxanne in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. I just wanted to tell you in the audience, I was in the Gulf War. I watched build-up. I was in Riyadh during 89 to 91. I was working in the medical business over there. And we could see from our operating room or theater, we called it, we could see the airport war, the C-30s, all the stealth, the equipment. We could see all that. I met so many of the European troops that were coming in. I was personal friends with the gunny sergeant and a lot of the guys on the Patriot missile systems. And it's a big process to put this stuff together, and then to get them all out is another big process. It's a really huge endeavor.
Yes, it is.
And, you know, it's big. And what you were seeing on CNN about Riyadh was certainly not true because I was there. And CNN was located at the end of the block. They were supposedly stationed in there. I think they were in Atlanta, but they were at the Hotel Marriott at the end of the block of the hospital, the street we were on. So that stuff was, so if the sirens and all that, none of that happened. It didn't happen like that. We didn't have sirens for like at least a week. So it's what you see and what they're telling us is so different than when you're in a situation. It's so different. And I also drove motorcade here in Houston for old man Bush. So I give a little credit to Trump because most people do not understand what's going on and how thick, how many layers of the onion he has to peel. It's bad. It's really, really bad.
Yeah, it really is. And I remember during that whole CNN Riyadh thing about the sirens, and some of those videos, the chroma key was so bad, it was like the talking heads were missing parts of their anatomy. Like they'd look off to one side and their nose would vanish. It was very poor quality work. But something that I learned when I was a professional magician many years ago, if people want to believe, they won't see the mistakes. They won't see the giveaways. And where that is most effective is in magicians who claim to be mentalists or spiritualists. You can get away with stuff no regular magician would dare try because the audience wants to believe. But today, the audience doesn't want to believe CNN anymore. Their ratings prove that. They don't want to believe the corporate media. They're on guard and they're skeptical. And that's why all over the web in the independent media, every time the corporate media makes a goof or tells a lie, it's just viral the next day.
Yes. Okay, well, you have a great show. Thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And we're going to take a call from Charlie in Los Angeles. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Trump and the media, Mike. You know, the media's control of the American mind is very sophisticated, and they are responsible for pumping Trump over 50% if that's true. Now, these people were dead in the water until Trump showed up in late 15 when he decided to run for president. Because in 2016, CNN had a gross profit of $1 billion. He pumped these people back up, and that's what's happened since he's come. He's crushed the internet. He's banned books. He's getting people all that's going down. This is because of Trump. People can't understand how the media operates, but they know how to control your mind, and they're pumping Trump up as the underdog, and he's paying them back. They were the media was dead, man, before Trump showed up. Believe me, internet rules, and now what rules? Fear. That's what rules.
I disagree.
So,
I disagree. I disagree because the corporate media, first of all, the liberal corporate media, which is most of it, is still in attack mode on Donald Trump, and they're paying the price for it. Their ratings are down in the Al-Qaeda. Their finances are terrible.
Unreal.
Hang on, let me finish, Charlie. Remember Clear Channel back during Bush and the run-up to the Iraq War? They were buying up all the radio stations in America. They had all this money to work with, and then there were so many scandals involving Clear Channel stations being caught telling lies. They rebranded as iHeartMedia, and now they're hovering at the edge of bankruptcy. So I disagree with this idea that the corporate media is prospering underneath Donald Trump. And Donald Trump isn't leading the attack on the independent media. That's being led by corporate media and corporate social media. I wish Trump would step on in and remember that it was the independent media that helped him defeat Hillary Clinton in the face of the corporate media's attacks on him. But I imagine he's probably got more important things to worry about right now.
The bottom line tells it all, Mike. These people were dead. As far as radio goes, radio has always been dead. Look at when CNN can make $1 billion gross profit and almost be broken out of business for other things because of Trump come back. Trump said he said it himself. I'm the ratings machine, and they're working hand in hand over the American people. They're playing you for fools.
I disagree. I disagree. I don't see it. I've looked at the financials of the corporate media. It's not there. They're in decline. Even here in Honolulu, if you go to the offices of the network affiliates, they're just these empty barns now, and there's hardly anybody there anymore because they're just feeding through the feed from the mainland. Anyway, Charlie, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go and get on back to the news. No, the corporate media is in trouble. They wouldn't be panicking like this and attacking the independent media if they thought they were reigning supreme. You can smell the fear coming out of these broadcast stations. Okay, getting on back to the wars here. Article out of Russia Insider. Will America accept its defeat or challenge the bear and dragon? And basically, the opinion is gelling around the world that, yes, in point of fact, the U.S. has failed in Syria. And what are they going to do? Now, maybe Trump recognized that, and that led to his announcement saying, we're pulling out of Syria soon. We're going to retire with as much dignity as we can have. And then, of course, he was apparently convinced by his advisors that we can't leave. It'll be seen as a defeat. Well, it's already seen as a defeat. And if we go back on in there, we're looking at another defeat, possibly direct confrontation with Russia. Now, remember, China and Russia have sent a message. They are militarily united as of now. And that is a warning to the United States. The United States might, if they get lucky, be able to prevail in a conventional war against Russia or China. They can't prevail against them both. And that means if they get into this, it will go nuclear at some point. I mean, there are people in this country who just want to start this war with nuclear weapons. Sheldon Adelson was out there screaming, let's just nuke Iran and get it over with. So, if the U.S. government behaves rationally and analytically and logically, they're going to realize they've taken this as far as they can go. From this point on, the risks far outweigh the potential gains. Another article, this one out of Russia Insider, saying, is it war yet? And they're saying that, yes, in many ways. There is a U.S.-Russian war already underway. At the moment, it's cold. it could very easily turn hot. Let's take another phone call. Curtis in Nevada. Aloha, Curtis. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I'm following up on a call from yesterday regarding the teachers. Is that from a little research, I find that the NEA that started in the early 1900s pretty much backed all those types of causes that, for example, civil rights, women's rights, and that's not a bad thing, but in the mid-'70s, it became pretty much a democratic supporting organization, and the teachers themselves, I found 2 polls that put them roughly in the range of 65 to 85% voting Democratic from the year 1975 to the present. And that this last poll was something like 85% who had voted for either Sanders or Clinton. So the teachers you have to be a long-term teacher. You have to be down with that. You have to agree with what you're doing. You can't stay there for 20 years disagreeing. And so they are part of that. And my point being is that when they tell you to honor the troops, they tell you to support the police and help our teachers, because the teachers are in charge of our future. That means our children. This is all propaganda, because what we've seen in reality, our troops are helping the international wars. They're a military international police force. Our police have become pretty much paramilitary, where they're going out looking at everybody as possible perps. And the teachers, whether they know the big picture or not, they have pretty much corrupted our generation. And
well, there's nothing new with that. There's nothing new with that. When I was in elementary school back in New England farming country, the school was teaching us to just hate the Russians, fear the Soviet Union. And I remember very clearly in our social studies class, there was this textbook, Our American Heritage, and I remember it had this beautiful painting of a riverboat on the front cover. And inside were all these cartoons to convince us about what a terrible, terrible place the Soviet Union was, and how evil they all were, and how great our system was. And that was pure propaganda as well. Schools are always used to propagandize the children. And that's been going on ever since the Prussian model was first established. That's why Prussia did it, to propagandize the children, to be of more use to the government than they were to their own families and villages.
Right, which is further evidence that there is some kind of technique being used, but there's a far cry from propagandizing against Russians than asking your 5-year-old whether you're a girl or not, or a boy, and maybe you might be wrong, type of thing. That's a big leap right there.
Well, that goes back to
if you look at some of the footage of these teachers, they're protesting, and when you look at them, I see a lot of what looks to me like Antifa types, only 20 years older. That's what I'm looking at. And in these protests, if they continue and escalate, well, you might be looking at another continuation of the deep state psyops. You get the teachers and the students and maybe the clergy are all protesting. This is who we should be supporting, type of thing. That's what I'm thinking.
Well, at some point, if things continue on the way that they're going now, I think we're going to start seeing mass protests of the American people across all spectrums, across everyone, just fed up with what the government and the media are doing. As far as this issue about teachers in school telling boys and girls that they may not be boys and girls, that goes back to what that politician in Hungary was saying the other day, that part of the goal of the New World Order is to just get us so confused about who we are that we're easier to control, which is something I've also been saying all along. Anyway, Curtis, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. And again, there's no surprise that schools are used to propagandize children. That's what they exist for. That's what they've always existed for. And the more centralized control of curriculum becomes, the more complete the propaganda is. That's why so many groups over the years have made an issue of local control of the school curriculum. Because the assumption is the local community knows what those children need to learn to grow up and be part of that local community. This is going back to a time where most people were born, lived their lives, and died within a very small radius. But starting with the Carnegie Educational Foundation, The agenda became centralized control of the curriculum and not to teach kids any more than they needed to just perform their functions as workers. Now, there's this Russian ex-general, Yevgeny Bushinsky. He served 41 years in the Russian military, and he's warning that this diplomatic tit-for-tat with all these diplomats are driving the world toward a war, which he describes as the last war in the history of mankind. And he's potentially true if it goes nuclear. And all of the West's nuclear weapons are employed, and all of Russia and China's nuclear weapons are employed. The radioactivity will kill off the surface of planet Earth. And all those money junkies and politicians and commanders who've got these underground bunkers, they're living this dream that they're going to go down into the bunkers, they're going to stay there for a year, and when they come on up, it's going to be a beautiful green planet they can live in. No, they're going to come up to an absolute desert. That's what's going to happen. Now, as we mentioned earlier in the show, the United Nations Security Council is in a meeting to discuss the Skripal poisoning case. Russia basically asked for this meeting and came on out and said that they've been the victims of all of this propaganda and venom and lies, and Britain refuses to provide any proof. They refuse to provide any samples of what they claim was the Novichok that poisoned Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. And all that Britain is doing is standing up there and repeating all the old lies about Russia as if to say, well, look, these are bad people anyway, so why would you listen to them? And whatever the United Nations Security Council agrees to will be vetoed by the United States. It's a guarantee. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. So let's get back to the Skripal case. Apparently, Yulia is awake. She's been awake for about a week. She made a phone call to her cousin Victoria in Russia, and Russia has released portions of the phone call. There was obviously some personal stuff. But basically, Yulia is saying she's fine. She's on her way to her full recovery. So is Sergei. Apparently, he's doing okay. Now, this is a far cry because remember only a couple of weeks ago, the British media was saying, oh, they're hovering at death's door. They'll never recover. The judge is going to order the plug be pulled. I think that the two Skripals, somebody wanted them to go away because now they're awake and talking, and Russia certainly is going to want to hear what they have to say about what happened. And meanwhile, Victoria is now saying she wants to bring Yulia back to Russia right now. Now, former Vice President of the OSCE, Willy Wimmer, is out there saying that Britain is behaving like a mafia state in the Skripal case. That Britain is trying to exploit European solidarity and pushing forward these warmongering accusations and trying to exclude Russia from any potential actual investigation of the poisoning probe. You know, Britain's attitude seems to be, you don't need to come in here. We've got Sherlock Holmes. We've got James Bond. They'll tell us what really happened here. And of course, this is a violation of all the international rules in the handling of any kind of chemical weapons incident. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, every nation that signed that, which includes Russia, is entitled to full participation in any investigation. Now, remember, not too long ago, Porton Down came on out with a bombshell announcement that it could not, in fact, prove that the Novichok used to attack Sergei and Yulia Skripal came from anywhere inside Russia. And by the way, as a little bit of a footnote, you have the world's most toxic nerve agent, and the two are still alive. Talk about a botched assassination. And I love that comment that Putin made when this first came on up, where he said, if I'd wanted these two dead, they would be dead. And I believe him on that issue. So Britain was just embarrassed by this whole thing. There's no evidence whatsoever that Russia was the source of the Novichok. So now they're coming on back with a new piece of propaganda where British security forces believe they have identified the exact Russian lab that made the very nerve agent Novichok, which was used on the attack on ex-spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter. Well, that's they're trying to basically come back from that embarrassment from Porton Down. And we know that it's a lie, because if Porton Down couldn't identify where the Novichok came from, then nobody can. These are the experts. They're the best in Great Britain. They're also used by our own Pentagon. The Pentagon is in there as well. Now, this is not like the anthrax that was sent to politicians and media people right after 9/11, which had a genetic fingerprint that allowed it to be chased back to a U.S. biological warfare laboratory. In theory, there might be chemical contaminants in the Novichok that might act as tracers, but Porton Down did not find any. So we're supposed to trust MI5 or MI6 to say, oh yes, we believe you that it came from Russia. No, we don't, actually. Interesting little story, this is out of Russia Today, on how the British Foreign Office's attempts to undermine Russia on social media seem strangely familiar. Because, you know, Boris Johnson's department's been out there slinging mud at Russia, making informative videos and flooding them on to social media. At the same time, they're accusing Russia of trying to propagandize the West by putting information on social media. And so the attitude is, it's good when we do it, it's bad when Russia does it. Of course it's not the same. We're the good guys. We stand for truth and lightness and good things, and Russia are all evil, and they stand for bad things, and they do all kinds of evil stuff, like pass gas in elevators and tear the tags off their couch cushions and steal the socks out of your dryers. The propaganda really is that transparent and that pathetic. Now, the other day we were talking about how this Crimean ship was illegally seized and is being held in Ukraine, and that Ukraine is trying to put pressure on the crew to renounce their Russian citizenship. It's an obvious provocation. And apparently the ship was seized not by Ukrainian naval forces, but by private vessels. So Russia is now sending a protection squad to the Azov Sea to ward off what they call pirates. Well, are they pirates or are they privateers? The difference is pirates work for themselves. Privateers certainly look like pirates to their victims, but they're usually working at the behest of somebody's government. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And apparently the U.S. is now deploying B-1B Lancers to Qatar's Al Udeid Air Base. Apparently to relieve the B-52 Strato forces is deployed in U.S. Central Command's area of responsibility since 2016. And for some reason, this story, which is in Sputnik News, keeps emphasizing the fact that the B-1B Lancer is non-nuclear. And I did a little digging, and that goes back to the START Treaty, where supposedly the B-1B had been developed to deploy nuclear weapons, but because of the START Treaty, the special mounting points on the wing pylons and the bomb bay were removed. And they say, well, see, it doesn't carry nuclear weapons and it never will. Well, come on. I'm sure that in the event of a full-on nuclear war, they'll be able to reattach those fittings very, very quickly. And the B-1B, of course, is supersonic and able to fly low missions, radar-evading missions, whereas the Stratofortress could not. All right, let's take a phone call from Dave in Missouri. Aloha.
Go tit for tat on trade tariffs. Okay, you know, China would have nothing if it were not for corrupt politicians and greedy American corporations who exported all our industry and the consumers who've lined up to buy all that cheap junk all these years. They would have nothing. And so it doesn't surprise me that state media in China, which of course is all state, wants to jump up and applaud Emperor Xi for standing up tough with the Americans. But it does show that they don't care that they have bankrupted the American people, and they don't care what they do. They intend to pose pain on us eventually. Anyway, economically, they're already saddling up for that, and so we see it with the yuan, with so much that's going on. So my view is, okay, if this is coming, let's go ahead and bite the bullet. Turn around all those Chinese cargo ships, send them back to China, tell American retailers and manufacturers, ride's over. You've got to produce what we're going to consume here now, or the shelves are going to be empty. And yeah, we don't have time for a transition. That means you're going to have to put that capital that you've been using to buy your stock back with to try to inflate your stock price you saved in taxes. You're going to have to put that in hardcore infrastructure investment to re-secure production for our consumer class, because China's cut off. It's done. Well, I mean, we're closing out.
Well, I wish it was that simple, but there are two aspects to consider. And one is that a lot of what China is threatening to put tariffs on now or rather what Trump is putting tariffs on now, are the raw materials our factories would need. It's not like we can get the factories up and running in just a few days. It actually takes quite a while to build and equip a factory to bring up a production line. And I know this because my father spent much of his career designing factories for people. And I got to look over his shoulder and see what the process looked like. And it's very long and drawn out. And it's not like software where you just throw it together, and if you've made a mistake, you go on back and you change something. You have to make sure it's all going to work before the cement even begins to pour. So it's a very long, drawn-out process. It took us 30 years to lose our manufacturing lead in the world. It's potentially going to take 30 years to get it on back. And that is a real issue. The second issue, of course, is where are we going to get the raw materials? Our nation is pretty much mined out at this point, and we are dependent on other countries to get the raw materials for manufacturing. But you're absolutely right. We got into this mess with China because our executive class of companies grew up in the age of the Harvard MBA, and they have no respect for the actual process of making the product. So they said, "Yeah, we'll just send it over there, and they'll make it for us, and we'll all get rich." And as a nation, culturally, we lost our love of making things, of building fine things, of making the best in the world. And that's reflected in the fact that so many of the products that we buy today are not designed for us to be able to repair them ourselves, but are designed to just be used until they break and then throw them in the landfill, contaminating the environment, and just go buy a new one. And it's a terrible, terrible way to run an economy and to run the manufacturing. I'd like to see our manufacturing come back. But the only way we're going to be able to have a chance of doing that is we have to stop competing with the rest of the world on the existing technological base, and we have to leapfrog forward. We have to find something new that nobody else has, like photonics, for example. And we have to make it work and and just say, this stays in the United States of America, and we're going to make all kinds of cool products with it, which you will buy from us. And that will provide the manufacturing jobs. But we're in a real corner. In fact, to be very honest, I'm starting to think that the U.S. has declined past the point where it can be rescued, and that it's only a matter of time until there is a complete and total collapse or a nuclear war. Dave, are you there? Oh, I guess we lost him. Okay. Now, as you know, Saudi Arabia has just been, on behalf of the United States, pounding the heck out of the poor people of Yemen. And to give you the backstory on this, some years back, there was what was called a successful intervention in Yemen, where they went on in with a color revolution, they caused a whole bunch of unrest, and they destabilized the legitimate government of Yemen and brought it crashing down and imposed a U.S. puppet regime. And the people of Yemen decided that they did not want to live under foreign puppet rule. Actually, hardly anybody in any country would be happy with that. And so they basically tried to kick out the foreign puppet rulers. And the U.S. can't stand for that. Their attitude is, once you're part of the American empire, you will stay part of the American empire, and you will love your puppet rulers. That's why they're still so angry with Iran. Iran succeeded in freeing itself from U.S. foreign puppet rule under the Shah. So the U.S. government, understanding just how war-weary the American people are, and realizing that a second intervention into Yemen would be questioned by a lot of people, got Saudi Arabia to be the front man for them. And we now know that the U.S. is basically funding this war. They're providing aerial refueling. They're actually directing the air campaign. Saudi assets, and it's been dragging on and dragging on. And my hat is off to those people of Yemen, how tough they're proving to be. And it's just resulted in the worst humanitarian catastrophe in the world. 22 million people, 2/3 of the population, are now in desperate need of food, aid, protection, housing. That's how bad it is. Saudi Arabia has been bombing the country since 2015. And in November, Saudi Arabia and its Gulf allies strengthened the pre-existing blockades on Yemeni ports, airports, and border crossings to restrict food, aid, and vital supplies from getting into the country. Now, Saudi Arabia has claimed these restrictions have been lifted, but humanitarian worker Susie Van Meegen, who recently visited the main port of Hodeidah, described the port as a complete wasteland, just totally empty. So the rest of the world are starting to stand up and say it is time for this to come to an end. Saudi Arabia is literally being warned by other countries, this must stop. Meanwhile, a very interesting story from the Telegraph in Great Britain. Thousands of American soldiers are pouring into Saudi Arabia in preparation for an invasion of Iraq. And that puppet government in Baghdad has got to be scratching their head saying, wait a minute, what did we do wrong? When I first saw the headline, the first thing I thought is the U.S. troops are going into Saudi Arabia to prepare for an invasion of Iran. But apparently 5,000 U.S. troops landed in the northern garrison town of Tabuk in the last week. The U.S. already has 3 military bases in Saudi Arabia. Well, over in Israel, the chief of Israel's Mossad told senior Israeli government officials he is 100% certain that Iran is committed to developing a nuclear bomb. You know, regardless of the rhetoric coming from the Iranian government that masks that fact. So Israel is back to saying, we've got to attack Iran. They're going to build a bomb. Israel has been screaming that Iran is just weeks away from a nuclear weapon for the past 30 years. Now, when this whole issue of nuclear technology was being fanned prior to the P5+1 agreement, international inspectors went into Iran and they poked around everywhere and they didn't find anything indicating nuclear weapons. The only evidence, and I use that term loosely, was the so-called laptop of death, which MEK provided to Israel, or Israel gave to MEK, and MEK gave it to somebody else. And it was supposedly a laptop stolen from an Iranian nuclear scientist, and it was filled with all these diagrams of how to make nuclear weapons and graphs and charts of nuclear weapon yields and everything. And real nuclear weapons experts looking at it denounced it as an obvious fake, that it looked like somebody just gone out onto the internet and just done a web search for anything connected to nuclear weapons, any kind of blueprints or anything, and they just loaded up this laptop so it could be held up to the media to say, see, they're planning a nuclear weapon. So they're back to pushing that agenda. And that tells me that Trump is going to pull out of the P5+1 deal, and the invasion of Iran is going to be on. The danger there is that Russia has already indicated that if Iran is invaded or attacked, Russia will come to their defense. And now we know China will be coming right alongside them. This has gone way past a Cold War. We're at the edge of a hot war. And a lot of people are going to be killed. A lot of the world is just going to be blown up and melted. And if it goes nuclear, I agree with that ex-Russian general. This could be the last war in the history of the human race. Now, over in Britain, members of parliament are almost certain that Korean missiles could hit British targets by 2019. Oh, that Kim Jong-un, yes, his missiles will hit us. Remember when Britain was claiming that Iraq could attack them with chemical weapons in just 45 minutes? That was phony Tony Blair. This is just more of the same. North Korea, for that matter, any other country, doesn't have a reason to attack Great Britain unless they are attacked first. The whole point of having nuclear weapons of deterrence and long-range missiles to carry those nuclear weapons of deterrence is to deter being attacked. And after all the money and effort that has gone into developing this deterrence, you don't just throw it away on a whim. North Korea is not a threat to Great Britain. North Korea is not a threat to the United States unless it is attacked. Even if Iran had nuclear weapons, they're not going to haul off and attack anybody. The only country that's ever just attacked another country with nuclear weapons is the United States. And that was done to demonstrate that we had them and were crazy enough to use them. That's the part that's missing in all of this talk about, oh, Russia's going to do this, and North Korea's going to do that, and Iran's going to do this. What is the motive? These are countries that just want to be left alone. Iran has not launched a war of conquest in over 200 years. It is not in their nature. That's what's missing. North Korea could attack us. Really? Why? Why would they do that? Knowing what the response would be. I'm sure that North Korea understands if they were to fire a nuclear missile anywhere, North Korea would vanish. They're smart enough to know that. So is Iran. Now, apparently, we're coming up on the elections in Venezuela, and it looks like Maduro is leading in the polls. He's going to get reelected. So French President Macron basically came on out and said, well, it's obvious the upcoming presidential election in Venezuela is not going to be free and fair because, you know, we all know somebody else other than Maduro has to be put in charge of Venezuela. And Maduro came back and basically told Macron to mind his own business and stay out of Venezuela's internal affairs. Good for Maduro. Now, getting on back to Israel, Human Rights Watch has basically come on out and said that Israel green-lighted the unlawful killing of unarmed Gaza protesters. And Human Rights Watch came out with a report and said senior Israeli officials who called for live ammunition to be used against protesters who did not pose a serious threat are responsible for their deaths. Here is the stunner. This is being reported in Newsweek. And if Newsweek is reporting this, it means Israel has screwed up big time. This is a public relations nightmare. Remember the comment I made earlier in the week about this could be Israel's equivalent of the Amritsar massacre in India, which historians see as the turning point where British control over India began to wane. Apparently, Israel decided to call in their air force to target one so-called armed terrorist on the Gaza border. And they basically brought in an Israeli Air Force aircraft to do a strike to somebody who was standing next to the security fence in northern Gaza. Hadn't gone over the fence, wasn't going through the fence, but they basically bombed this guy, and he died in the hospital. And Israel came on out and said that we will use all force against terrorists to avoid any harm to the security of Israeli civilians. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, they hit a farmer who was trying to basically tend his fields, which run alongside the border fence. And Israel just used an entire warplane and aerial munitions to kill this farmer. Now, as the tensions are increasing, you know, Israel is desperate for the Palestinians to be seen as the violent provocateurs of what's going on. And it's necessary to remember at this point a special group within the Israeli military force called the Mustarabin. And this is a special unit that is trained to pose as Palestinians. They dress like Palestinian protesters. They speak with the same accents and same expressions. They show the same mannerisms. Their faces are covered with checkered keffiyehs or balaclavas. They chant along with the Israeli army. And what they do is they try and rabble-rouse Palestinians around them to throw rocks at the Israelis so that the Israelis can turn around and open fire. They're agent provocateurs, and we need to keep an eye out for them. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back after these few. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, down in the Philippines, I have to admire this guy's sense of humor. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte is basically saying that if my plane explodes, you can ask the CIA. And he basically was out there just commenting on the fact that relations with the U.S. have really deteriorated ever since Obama dared to lecture Duterte on how to handle the drug problem inside the Philippines. And basically, Duterte came on out and said that the U.S. government lacks a word of honor. They don't keep their promises, and that's certainly true. That's absolutely true. And we had good relations with the Philippines until Duterte started really going after the drug dealers and drug smugglers. And Obama said, no, you can't do that. Duterte said, yes, I can. And at that point, relations between the two countries soured. And Duterte is now turning away from the U.S. He's buying weapons for his military from Russia and China. He's not buying from the U.S. anymore. And all of that because Obama wanted to protect the lives of some drug dealers inside the Philippines. Apparently at the Las Vegas Air Base, a U.S. Air Force F-16 fighter jet has crashed at Nellis Air Base during a routine training flight. The condition of the pilot is unknown at this time. Another reminder that our military hardware isn't all that up to par. So let's talk about the economy. I know we're a little late getting to it in the talking points here, but China just listed $50 billion of U.S. goods it might hit with a 25% tariff. This includes soybeans, small aircraft, all kinds of things. And the American manufacturers that sell to China are in a bit of a panic right now. Now, the White House is out there saying there's nothing to worry about. It's all going to work on out. China, on the other hand, is already saying we have already shaken the U.S. economy. And yes, the Dow was up again today, but we know that that's constantly being rigged. They're trying to maintain the illusion that Trump can win this trade war. And I don't think he can. We're not positioned for our manufacturing and agriculture to take advantage of a trade war. Trump is raising on a busted flush is really what it comes down to. China is saying it's going to take the United States to the World Trade Organization to see if they can hammer this all out here. Meanwhile, we have to remember that China still has a nuclear option in a trade war. They have a huge amount of U.S. treasuries. And if they were to just dump them all at once, it would have a major shock to the U.S. economy. Now, they're not talking about doing that yet, but we have to keep in mind that, yeah, it's a possibility. If Trump pushes them too far, they could dump those treasuries. All right, we're going to take another break for station identification. Back with hour number 3 after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're talking about the economy. And a while back, I was saying that for those of you investing in precious metals, which is a really good idea, as long as you keep it under your control, the real physical metal, don't buy those paper contracts, that silver had for a time been outperforming gold. In part because we know the price of gold is being artificially suppressed to discourage people from closing their savings accounts or emptying their stock portfolios and stocking up on the metal. Lately, silver has not been doing very well either, leading to a lot of people to suspect that maybe the money junkies have begun to realize that they can't do it just to gold. They have to do it across the spectrum of the metals. And so silver has been a little bit in decline. But we have this article down in Investment Watch blog quoting James Anderson, basically saying that, yeah, there's manipulation going on, and that what the big banks, led by J.P. Morgan, have done to silver is incredibly criminal. But unfortunately, because the criminal banks run the world, they get away with it. Meanwhile, J.P. Morgan has quietly built the largest physical silver position in modern history. It looks like they're going for a replay of the Hunt brothers scandal, which was back in, I think, the late 80s, where they tried to corner the silver market. So again, a lot of stuff out there. Article out of the Express in Great Britain, Bitcoin price slump cryptocurrency plunges 10% in a day. Should investors be worried? Yes, they should. There is nothing supporting any kind of value for a cryptocurrency. It is purely what somebody else is willing to pay for it. There's no commodity base behind it. It's no more real than a Federal Reserve note. The only advantage is you're not being charged interest on the cryptocurrency. You are charged handling fees. But yes, it could evaporate very, very quickly, just like the dollar could. There's nothing backing up either one of those. All right, let's take a phone call here from Michael in Los Angeles. Aloha, Michael. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Snack Bar, my friend. I just wanted to say, Mike, I don't know if you ever worked on Pokemon, but there's an episode of Pokemon in the first season I was watching with the kids, and there's a guy named, one of the characters in the show, his name's Victor, and he looks just like you, and he surfs a giant wave, and he's a Hawaiian-type looking guy. He has a mustache and hair just like you. It's pretty hilarious.
Okay. No, I didn't work on Pokemon. I've never actually... Oh, I am looking at the picture. My goodness. He needs to have a little more gray added in at this stage. But that is so funny.
Yeah, man.
So funny.
Looks just like you.
You know.
Yeah.
I only went surfing once. When we first moved to Hawaii, I only went surfing once, and I broke my surfboard on the first time out. So I basically gave that up as a hopeless cause.
So you lived in Hawaii all this time, you only been surfing once, you said,
I've only been surfing once, you know. I hope they let me into heaven. I could get up there, and they're going to say, we put you in Hawaii, and you only went surfing once. You can go to the other place.
Right on, Mike. Yeah, and listen, another thing, I just wanted to comment about Sheldon Anderson and these people these people that like lobby for APEC and stuff. It's just unbelievable. And I don't know how we're going to dig ourselves out of this mess, Mike. It's just, you know, what Mark Passio says, you know, I want to quote him because he's also a legend. There are order followers and order givers, and we just got to break out of the system, you know, and just say enough is enough. And that's all, Mike. And just keep well, live long, and have a great Thursday, buddy.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Thank you for the kind words. We're going to let you go. That is so funny, that Pokemon character. Somebody actually sent in some images from World of Warcraft where they were putting up whatreallyhappened.com stuff in World of Warcraft. So I guess we've spread to all kinds of places. I have no idea what our actual reach is here. Now, getting on back to the economy. As you know, private home ownership in this country is in decline. People just can't afford them. Because of all the house flipping and land flipping that's going on. Housing prices are through the roof. Rentals are through the roof. People don't have the money for it. And now that traditional mainstay of lower income living, the mobile homes, are moving out of reach of Americans. This is coming from UBS, saying Americans can no longer afford mobile homes. And apparently the delinquency rate has soared 2 percentage points over the last year. So it is a mess, and I don't see any way to turn it around. I think the U.S. has gone so far, it is unrecoverable, and they waited too long to try and do something about it, or they just didn't want to do something about it. Right now, we can expect to see people in positions of power and wealth to just start plundering the country as much as they can ahead of the collapse. And that goes back to this coffee mug we sell in our online store. The last official act of any government is to loot the country or loot the nation. And that's exactly where we are right now. We're going to do a shout out to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Over in Bahrain, they've just discovered a huge oil field with 80 billion barrels in reserves. The downside is it's shale oil, and but there's a huge amount of it. And apparently they also discovered 14 trillion cubic feet of natural gas beneath an existing field. And I'm just expecting somebody to come out of the White House and say, we are very concerned with the ongoing human rights violations in Bahrain and plan to invade. I mean to intervene humanitarianly just as soon as we can. Now, do you remember HSBC, big stink a while ago, where they were exposed for helping clients to dodge millions in taxes, conceal their assets, and obtain untraceable cash? Now, Hervé Falcani was an IT expert at HSBC's Swiss bank, and he blew the whistle. And he blew the whistle on them, and apparently the government of Switzerland issued an arrest warrant for him, an international arrest warrant, and he's now been arrested in Spain, and they're going to send him back to Switzerland. And that tells you a lot about our world, where the whistleblowers who expose wrongdoing by government and corporations are punished, and the governments and the corporations walk away, if anything at all, a wrist slap. HSBC is still in business. Another phone call here. Jeff in Georgia. Aloha, Jeff. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, great show. I just watched a documentary by Bill Still. Have you heard of The Secret of Oz?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. That's a great little video.
Okay. Yeah, and I've watched that several times, Michael. And, you know, that's why I became convinced that all governments should control the money supply, and money doesn't have to be backed by anything as long as you control the quantity, because the banksters will always fall back to having a commodity like gold, because they will control the gold or the silver. But that's a very sobering documentary, and people should watch that, because that tells us what we're up against, even from the time of Rome. Of the great Roman Empire was great, and the people were prosperous, and their money was not backed by nothing until Caesar came in and started coining it in gold. And then the problem started. And the history of the United States,
I think your history is a little bit fuzzy, because Rome's coinage was based on the same principle as the early American coinage. The coins were made out of metals that had intrinsic value. Bronze was a very valuable metal, and the silver, and yes, there were some gold coins, but Rome controlled that value, and they simply coined as much as they needed to carry on their commerce. Now, the bankers, over time, they don't want to bother with the gold. They want to have a make-believe currency that where they can simply inflate it or deflate it at will to their own benefit. And the ideal solution is that government should control the money and the people should control the government, which is exactly how the Founding Fathers set up this nation.
well, Michael, I was basing that just on The Secret of Oz. And what is pointed out in The Secret of Oz documentary is that Ben Franklin, during colonial times, said that the greatest sin that the British did against the American colonies was to take away their colonial script, which was based on nothing. And Pennsylvania was very prosperous because they had honest men that controlled the quantity of that money. And, you could go to the Great Depression. Our money was backed on gold. And the bankers manipulate, they actually retracted the money supply and caused, farms to go under and great unemployment. You have to control the quantity of money. And it has to be done by the government because you can't trust the private greedy bankers.
No, the bankers, the bankers, when the depression of the 1930s happened, it was exacerbated by the fact that the bankers started taking in the money supply. There wasn't money to run commerce. And you're right, it drove farmers out of business, and then the banks would come on in and buy the farms for pennies on the dollar, buy homes for pennies on the dollar, buy factories for pennies on the dollar, and then they wound up at the end of that depression basically owning all of this real wealth. Then they turned around and started selling it again. And that's something that banks do. That's why there's always a boom and bust inflation and deflation cycle. To basically get people to work and pay for these very expensive assets, then crush the value of the assets and buy them back cheap, and then resell them again and start the cycle all over again.
Yeah, but I would just recommend to people, watch The Secret of Oz, watch The Money Masters, and watch Edward Griffin, because he has a little different take. And there's other people that have tremendous documentaries, but all of them, the common thread is that the financial system is a fraud.
Yeah,
And,
it is.
And one other thing.
Before you go further, Henry Ford said, if the American people really understood how our banking system operated, there would be a revolution by morning.
Absolutely. And that's why I harp on that, because, hey, I have kids, and I don't think they have a future.
Right now, I agree with you. They don't. The only future the younger generation is looking at is in uniform. And that's a very scary situation. And
Michael, that's exactly it. I'm a civil servant. I'm part of the Department of Defense, and if I could do, I love my country, but our Department of Defense is run by bankers, and there may be other people like me in the Department of Defense that think like I do, but when they send us into places where I'll shake my head. We signed the contract, and they control the purse strings. They control the politicians. Until we get control of the money, it's a cartel running everything.
It absolutely is, and it's been that way for 100 years. In fact, I think future historians will probably say that the beginning of the decline of the American empire was with the creation of the Federal Reserve. When the U.S. Government, the American people, lost control of their own money supply.
Yes. Anyway, that's all I really had, Michael. Great show.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go and switch over to Andrew in Arizona. Aloha, Andrew. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
With my understanding, it seems like that is I think you have to have it backed by something. And, gold and silver has just historically been, we're doing things value there. It's just historically been actual money, and so if you have just a pure fiat and just banking, banking on that, okay, it's not owned by a private banking cartel and the government will take it over. I mean, to me, that I know, I understand they did try this in the early days of the country, but to me it seems like it's always the government, no matter what, is always ripe for corruption, no matter what, and especially if they can just print themselves. They're always going to vote themselves to print more money, and they're going to deflate they're going to inflate the currency, and so, and of course, then comes all sorts of horrible problems.
Well,
so
prior,
I don't see.
When this country was started, the amount of money that the U.S. government could print was limited because the actual money was the silver and gold coinage, and the paper notes were merely a claim check. And so you couldn't print more claim checks than you had the silver and gold to back them up. And that put a restraint on the government's ability to overspend itself. But once the bankers came on...
That's the only way to do it.
Well, the bankers came on in with the First Bank of the United States, and it wasn't really backed by much of anything. And that's why when it caused so much damage to the economy, it impoverished the American people and it enriched the bankers, and that's why Congress refused to renew the charter for the First Bank of the United States, which is what triggered the War of 1812. And unfortunately, the War of 1812 left the U.S. in so much debt, they had to agree to charter the Second Bank of the United States. That one was shut down by Andrew Jackson, at which point there was an assassination attempt on his life. And the Second Bank of the United States tried to operate as a normal depositor bank and failed after just 2 years, which is a reminder that private central banks are nothing at all like the mom and pop depositor banks you do business with. They're legalized counterfeiting operations. That's what they are.
Right. Well, and you're right. And they based it upon they backed this paper currency on at the time I think it was like they made a value for the silver Spanish silver dollar, I think it was.
Well, they all go back. they all go back to the Thaler mines in Thaler, Germany, which was the first mine to produce its product in ingots of a uniform size and shape to make it easier to sell the product. You didn't have to weigh out the silver. You just say so many of these silver discs, and they were stamped with the hallmark of the mine. And they were so reliable in terms of how much silver was in them, they started being used as a medium for exchange. And it very, very quickly spread, and all the subsequent dollars were based on that same measure. Whether it was the Spanish silver dollar, the colonial dollar, the Morgan dollar, and so forth. It wasn't until the peace dollar that the U.S. began to actually reduce the silver content in the dollar coin.
What was that mining? A German mine?
It was located in Thaler, Germany, Thaler, I believe, and that's where this whole idea of coined money really began.
Oh wow! I have never heard that. Awesome, thank you.
Okay, let me clarify that. This is where the idea of that silver coin of that size and value began. Obviously, Rome had coinage before that. A lot of other ancient civilizations had coinage. Yeah. Oddly enough, ancient Egypt did not have any kind of money or currency at all until they were conquered by the Greeks.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was all done by Pharaoh saying, you take the food over here, feed the workers, you build the pyramid, and so forth and so on. And following the conquest by Alexander the Great, the idea of a currency and coinage was introduced to Egypt. Anyway, Andrew, we're going to let you go here. We're getting close to another commercial break. Thank you very much for the phone call. Now, over in Oklahoma, in response to the teacher strike, the House is now looking at a revenue bill dedicated to an education fund. They've passed it. They're figuring the Senate is probably going to do the same thing. And really, yeah, if this country can spend $13 billion on an aircraft carrier that doesn't really work, we can afford to pay our teachers a little bit more. These teachers are having to work extra jobs, and that means that they're in their classroom tired, and that means they're less effective as teachers to those kids. And so, yeah, we got to pay our teachers more. We got to pay the military less. I would like to see our taxes go to education, and I'd like to see the Pentagon out in front of the supermarket with a bake sale to buy a new bomber. That's what I would like to see. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Let's talk about immigration and globalism for a little bit here. Now, as you know, there has been this huge caravan, mostly of people from Honduras, who have been marching northward with the intention of just sort of punching their way through the U.S. border into California. And Donald Trump, of course, is positioning the National Guard down there on the border to basically try and stop them. But apparently, according to the Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen, she has informed Mexico's top diplomat that the U.S. National Guard troops being deployed to the border will not carry arms or carry out migration or customs control activities. So please tell me why they're going down there. Is it just for show? Well, Mexico announced they were basically going to break up this caravan, and the assumption was that they would all just turn around and go home. But apparently Mexico is giving these caravan migrants transit visas, meaning Mexico is saying it is okay for you to cross Mexico and get to the border wherever you can go on your own. So the problem has not been solved, and the National Guard is being hamstrung from trying to do anything about it. Well, we've mentioned this before, but over at the Gateway Pundit, they're reminding us again, more than 1 million illegal immigrants have received California's driver's licenses, which come with automatic registration to vote. And there's such a flood of them, it makes it almost impossible to purge these names of non-citizens from the voter rolls. This system is set up to basically allow the illegals to come into our country illegally and then vote Democratic. It's totally out of control. Now, somebody wrote an interesting article saying, don't blame the Californians. saying that everybody's saying Californians didn't fight for their state and therefore deserve to live in the squalor that it is today. And California has really deteriorated. I was looking at some videos, and it has certainly gone downhill since Claire and I lived there. But this article is reminding everybody of Prop 187, which was known as the Save Our State Initiative. And this was back in 1994. This was put to a popular referendum, and the people of California overwhelmingly voted in favor of it, which basically said we have to stop the illegal immigration into the state of California. And they were pointing to the personal injury and the damage and the criminality of the illegal immigrants in the state. And the resolution passed. And then a bunch of liberal judges overturned it and said it was unconstitutional. Well, I'm sorry, but illegal immigrants are not protected by the Constitution. They have no rights in this country. That's what illegal means. So, again, I wish those liberal judges who overturned the will of the people of California would be forced to live in the areas where the illegal immigrants have taken over. I'm sure all these judges have got wonderful little homes in very, very nice, plush neighborhoods, and they keep the curtains drawn because they don't want to look outside and see what the results of their interference in the will of the people has done. And mind you, these are Democrats, where the will of the people is supposed to be the law of the land. Now, over in Iowa, lawmakers have approved a bill that will cut off state funding to cities and counties that declare themselves to be sanctuaries and try and circumvent federal immigration law. The bill faces a final vote in the Iowa Senate. It is expected to pass. So people are starting to fight back here. Interesting little tweet showed up. And we linked to it from whatreallyhappened.com, and it says, quote, I was in Nicaragua, and I saw essentially a CNN infomercial on how to come illegally into the United States and get asylum. It was aired across Latin America, encouraging people to do this, and this is a real problem. And it was signed Veteran Army. Now, last month, 50,308 people were stopped at the Mexican border. That's up 203% over the same time last year. This is an epidemic, and it is out of control. And these illegals are going to vote themselves our country if we let it happen. And unfortunately, again, I cannot understand how this Department of Homeland Security is saying that these National Guard that are going on down to the border are not being allowed to take weapons, and they're not allowed to carry out migration or customs control activities. What are they just supposed to do? Stand there and smile as the illegals walk past them? This is just absurd. This is a joke being played on the people of the United States of America. Now, over in Europe, the Prime Minister of Poland is revealing that there are a total of 12 nations ready to topple Macron and Merkel's agenda, triggering a power shift in Brussels. More about this when we come back from these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So we're talking about how the Prime Minister of Poland is saying that there are now 12 nations ready to topple Macron and Merkel's agenda for open borders and continuation of the refugee, and it could be a fundamental power shift in Brussels. So, interestingly enough, there's a follow-up article. This came out of Sputnik News, talking about this advocacy group that is out there saying that the U.S. Congress should hold hearings on a security threat to NATO and the U.S. from efforts by Poland, Hungary, and other Central European allies to weaken Western democratic standards. Now, this group is called Human Rights First on Wednesday. And what they're out there trying to sell is the idea of these nations wanting to protect their borders, wanting to keep their cultures intact, is a threat to Western democratic standards. What they're really talking about is that the U.S. and NATO have to bitch slap those countries back in line with the New World Order. Now, somebody wrote in an email asking about Operation Wetback, which was Eisenhower's project to stop illegal immigration, and he did it. He just shut it right down with only 1/10 of the Border Patrol agents that we have today, and he didn't have the National Guard. And yes, those guys were armed. I went out and I did a photo search, and I'm seeing these border security guards. They're holding shotguns. And that worked. This catch and release and this dreamer stuff, it's not solving the problem. Yeah, shotguns are going to work. Crocodiles in the Rio Grande, that might work. We could get those punkin' chunkin' guys, you know, with the trebuchets and the air cannon. We'll give them the illegal immigrants and let them fire them back across the border. Longest distance and highest bounce wins. We could sell tickets. We could pay for Trump's border wall just on the TV rights alone of illegal chunking. I'll have to come up with a catchier name for that. France has decided they want to launch their own European army by June. This is outside the existing efforts by Brussels to create a European army. And France is inviting Great Britain to join even after the Brexit. So I'm not sure what Macron is thinking, but there's obviously a dynamic at work there. Now, German prosecutors have lodged a formal application for the deposed Catalan president, Carles Puigdemont, to be extradited back to Spain. And basically, all he did was organize a referendum. And he was president of Catalan. It was within his legal rights to do so. But of course, Spain's attitude is, no, you're not allowed to do that. So they've issued an arrest warrant. And Carlos was arrested in Germany. He was trying to drive from Finland to Belgium, where he has a home. And they're going to send him back to Spain, where he could basically face trial and prison over the independence referendum. So there you have democracy and self-determination, European style. Now, as you know, Israel and their agents have been screaming anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism all over the place. They're screaming anti-Semitism in Europe at the Labour Party and Corbyn. They've been screaming about how in Germany there's a rising anti-Semitism. But there's this article that came on out and said that before you get caught up in this, you need to look at the real numbers. And they're saying the real official figures of anti-Semitic incidents don't back up the claims that there's a rise in anti-Semitism. It's just not there. It's just more propaganda. And one thing that always worries me is that anytime Israel's getting ready to do something really ugly, they always start screaming anti-Semitism, we're the victims, oh, pity us, everything that we do is justified because of what Hitler and the Nazis did. And that's very alarming because tomorrow there is going to be yet another demonstration by the people of Gaza who are going to march along that border fence protesting, rather demonstrating for their right of return that was promised them during the creation of Israel. And apparently Israel's government is refusing to rescind the order for snipers to fire on anybody who walks too close to the fence, with too close apparently up to whoever has their hand on that trigger. Now, over in Great Britain, their feral gangs, the gangs of refugees, are now considered a bigger danger than terrorism. And even worse, these refugees are going online to boast of their shootings and stabbings and rapes, and it's being seen as basically inspiring more of the refugees to do exactly the same thing. Now, London is just reeling from all the murders that are going on. And as a result, there was another teenager just gunned down overnight, 17-year-old Tanisha's, the 48th person killed this year. And the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is now facing calls to resign. He won't. He's there to push that globalist agenda no matter what happens. Now, compassionate British subjects formed a human chain around a mosque to protect it. And they held a Hug a Muslim Day. in anticipation of that much promoted Punish a Muslim Day, which failed to materialize. All the brochures and all the flyers and all the stickers were put on up saying it's Punish a Muslim Day. It did not happen. Finally, somebody is standing up to political correctness. Over in Great Britain, members of the Derbyshire Constabulary Choir were basically ordered. It's an all-male choir. And they were ordered to allow women to come on in. And basically they're connected to the local police force. Peter Goodman, who took over the force last summer, told the choir to accept women or face losing its 60-year association with the police service. Now, I can tell you from having worked with Claire, when you bring a whole new bunch of people into a choir, it can take years to get them trained up to where they're performing to quality. So the choir is saying, we're not going to be connected anymore. They're changing their name to the Derbyshire Community Male Voice Choir. Good for them. Now, I don't have a problem with mixed voice choirs, obviously. But I do have a problem with all these political correct people coming on in and presuming they have some kind of a right to tell you how to do what your business is. Whether it's bake a cake for a lesbian couple, or allow women in to sing in an all-male choir, or to allow men to compete in women's athletic events. Now, you've been hearing all this stuff about white privilege, oh, white privilege is bad. Oh, those white people, they've got it so good. We've got to take them down a notch. George Washington University is offering a workshop. In fact, it started just today, focusing on Christian privilege. And according to the school's Multicultural Student Services Center website, the workshop will teach that Christians enjoy a privileged, easier life than their non-Christian counterparts, and that Christians possess built-in advantages. Boy, if you were to say that about the Jews, you would be hung, drawn, and quartered in the corporate media. But now Christians are being targeted. Now, I'm not a Christian. Claire is, I'm not. But this is flat out wrong. Our nation guarantees freedom of religion, and that all religions are on an equal footing. Now, further along in political correctness, Hillary is out there trying to take credit for the Me Too movement, despite her close ties to Harvey Weinstein. And she's saying that she thinks her losing the election probably accelerated that wave of women who are abused by men in power. Now, here's the latest one. Apparently, there is a book that's coming on out claiming that Judy Garland, when she was 17 years old and filming The Wizard of Oz, was groped by the Munchkins. And it might have happened. The Munchkins were a very wild crowd. In fact, there's a movie about it called Under the Rainbow, about how drunk they were and how they were changing the lyrics to Ding Dong, the bitch is dead, and all kinds of stuff. And it's a funny story. But, you know, Judy Garland probably could have defended herself. She had the size and weight advantage over the little people. But you got to admit, the Me Too crowd must be getting desperate if they're having to go to the graveyard to dig up more victims to wave at us. Now, we've been talking about all these social media crazes, people who are eating Tide Pods and snorting condoms and all this other stuff, and then you look at these people and say, these are the people who think they should decide our national firearms policy. But the latest social media craze for idiots is microwaving foil. And it started apparently as a hoax. Somebody took a big ball of aluminum foil and showed it on Twitter, and then showed the same microwave oven with a smoothly polished metal ball. And apparently this took off and people started trying it. It doesn't work, and in fact, you can ruin a microwave oven doing this. So maybe a microwave oven manufacturer or importer started the hoax because business is doing so bad. But no, you don't put foil in the microwave. It'll throw lightning bolts all over the place. And the more foil there is, the more it acts like an antenna, and it converts those microwaves directly into high voltage electricity. And yes, you can burn out your oven doing that. So please don't go along with this latest craze. Just because it's up on Twitter that it's cool to do something doesn't mean that you should do it. Now, getting on over to Parkland, as you know, they led this national march, ban the guns, ban the guns, ban the guns, and they've come back to school, and they didn't get what they wanted. What they got is a school with heightened security that they're complaining feels like a jail. They came back to a mandate for clear see-through backpacks, and they're whining and crying and saying, no, we hate this, it's an invasion of our privacy and everything. And they're whining because the purpose that this was all set up for was repeal of the Second Amendment and confiscation of guns. And what they actually got, improved school security measures and transparent backpacks, that's not what they wanted. That's not what they were organized to do. That's not what they were paid to do. And so they're very unhappy. They don't want safer schools. They want the guns gone. And they failed miserably. Gun sales soar and set records in March. Apparently, there were over 2.7 million background checks. Every time the gun grabbers do this, gun sales go on up. And I think that's why they're shifting from gun confiscation to repealing the Second Amendment, because they don't want people to be able to go out and buy guns every time they stage another one of these fake shootings. By the way, the gun grabbers are already seizing on the fact that the YouTube shooter used a small handgun and not an assault rifle to say, well, see, we have to ban all guns, not just assault rifles. We have to ban all guns. No, let's ban prescription psychiatric medication. I want to know if this lady was on those things. We have a right to know if law-abiding gun owners are being unfairly demonized for big pharma. Now, over in London, there was a 78-year-old resident in his home, and he discovered 2 male intruders inside the home. And there was a struggle that ensued between the homeowner and one of the males. And the homeowner stabbed one of the men in the upper body. No firearms involved. And the London Ambulance Service took the injured male away. He died at the hospital. And police have now arrested the homeowner on suspicion of grievous bodily harm before then arresting him on suspicion of murder. They've arrested this guy for defending his home, defending his life, defending his wife who was sleeping upstairs. This guy's the victim. These were criminals inside his home. Why is it a crime to defend your own home? And it's like, what is the message coming from the London police? That this 78-year-old man is supposed to sit quietly in a chair, let the thieves just take everything they wanted and hope they don't rape his wife. We have a natural right to defend ourselves. We absolutely do. Chuck Baldwin agrees. Chuck Baldwin is a pastor and a radio host, and he's out there saying, quoting a passage from 1 Timothy, saying that every adult has a duty to provide for your family, but you cannot provide protection for your family without being equipped to do so. So he's out there saying that owning a gun, owning a sporting rifle, is a biblical requirement. I think the London police are completely off their nut, arresting the 70-year-old man for defending his home from a home invasion. Now, over in the village of Deerfield, Illinois, they just voted 6-0 to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. So attention, all you muggers, burglars, rapists, druggies, and thieves. Deerfield, Illinois is open for business. Go get them. Apparently, over in Baltimore, there's been another big stink. 8 Baltimore police officers have been arrested for robbing homeless people, stealing drugs from drug dealers, and reselling it back onto the street. And it's not too surprising. I actually, when I went to school at Cal State Fullerton, the best drug connection near the campus was a California highway patrolman. And he was confiscating drugs from the dealers and reselling it out of the back of his black and white. And he then quit the police force, and he bought himself a Radio Shack franchise. So this kind of stuff goes on all the time. We're looking at more cold and snow coming for the U.S. Northeastern areas this weekend. And apparently over in Great Britain, some of their cathedrals are still under snow. More snow forecast for Europe. This is, in fact, April 5th. Gosh darn, that human-caused global warming. Meanwhile, Facebook has finally admitted that data from almost all of its 2 billion users has been compromised by malicious actors. It's not just 50 million, it's not 87 million, it's almost the whole ball of wax, nearly 2 billion users. Facebook is now admitting they scan the contents of all your private messenger texts if you're using their cell phone app. It's completely out of control. You and your private information have become a commodity. We're going to take a break for commercials, back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today, and a story is just now breaking. Earlier, we mentioned the fact that Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia are apparently improving, and that Yulia was allowed to make a phone call to a family member in Russia, Victoria, I think the name was, and Russia is starting to release information about the phone call. And here is the part that is really going to blow this whole case out of the water. According to this niece in Russia, Yulia told them that at that lunch that they ate just before they collapsed, they both ordered fugu. Now, if you don't know what fugu is, it is a Japanese delicacy. It is made from the puffer fish. It is very dangerous. And if it's not prepared correctly, you can be poisoned by it, because the blowfish is loaded with tetrodotoxin, so that other predators will not eat it, even with all the spikies all over. And I don't know how they deal with it in Great Britain, but in Japan, fugu chefs have to be specially licensed on how to correctly prepare it. And traditionally in Japan, when you order fugu, and it's very expensive, and people like it, it's a status symbol, and you will get a little buzz from it. You actually get high off of it. Traditionally in Japan, the fugu chef will deliver the fugu to the table, and then he will eat one piece of it himself to prove that it is safe. So the dish has to be just the outer white flesh of the fish. If there's even a tiny, tiny piece of the inner organs mixed in with it, the tetrodotoxin is much more highly concentrated there. And it sounds like this may have been what made them sick and put them in the hospital. And then somebody said, okay, how can we use this to go after Russia? But this completely undermines that whole Novichok story. Lie after lie after lie after lie after lie. Okay, now then, getting on back to Facebook. Street artist Sabo is plastering New York with posters mocking Mark Zuckerberg over the Facebook privacy. And the slogan on the latest posters are, "You can't watch your kids 24/7, but we can." People are understandably upset. And maybe they're trying to condition the next generation to not expect any kind of privacy. But I'm of a generation where privacy is something we value. And it doesn't mean we're doing something bad. It just means we have an instinct to keep things private. If I stop off on my way home from work at a bakery and I get a jelly donut that violates my diet, that's my business and the baker's business. I don't want the government to know about it. It's none of their business to know about it. Apparently, there's been another breach of data. This one is dwarfing the Panama Papers leak. Something like 1.5 billion sensitive files, including payroll data, tax returns, medical records, credit cards, and intellectual property. It's amazing. We should not be allowing these companies to collect our data because they cannot take care of it, or they're just not interested. All right, there's the music. It's time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Please stay tuned to John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here and share it with everybody that you know. Use email, use private chat, use face-to-face conversations. Staff the social media. They're filtering everything. This is a war between the truth and the lies, and right now we're on the side of the truth. We have to keep fighting. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.